In the summer of 1952, the United States experienced one of the most famous and controversial waves of UFO reports in its history. It did not happen over a remote desert. It happened over Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. And what made it explosive was not only what people claimed to see, it was the involvement of radar. Multiple radar stations in and around Washington detected unknown targets. And those detections were serious enough that fighter jets were scrambled to investigate. This event is often called the Washington, D.C. flap of 1952. 2 weekends in July became the center of the story. And decades later, the question still remains. What exactly happened in the skies above the Capitol? The first major night occurred on July 19th. Late in the evening, air traffic controllers at Washington National Airport began noticing unusual radar returns. Targets appeared in restricted airspace. They did not behave like normal aircraft. They seemed to move in ways that were difficult to interpret. Some reports described sudden changes in speed. Others described targets that appeared, disappeared, and reappeared. As the radar contacts continued, other radar systems also picked them up, including military radar. This mattered because it reduced the chances that the entire event was a single equipment malfunction. Multiple systems, multiple operators, same night, same area. Soon, reports came in of visual sightings. People on the ground described lights in the sky, objects that moved slowly and then changed position. The combination of radar and visual reports created pressure. This could not be treated as a simple misunderstanding. Not in Washington. So the military responded. Fighter jets were scrambled. The idea was simple. If something unknown is in the air, you intercept it, identify it, and report back. But the intercept did not produce the kind of clean outcome that ends a story. According to accounts, as jets approached, the radar targets often disappeared. Then, after the jets left the area, the targets returned. This pattern would become one of the most argued details because it creates two opposite interpretations. One interpretation is that the objects were real and were responding intelligently to the interceptors. The other interpretation is that the radar returns were not solid objects at all, but radar anomalies that shifted with conditions. The story did not end after one night. A week later, on July 26th, the sightings happened again. And this second weekend turned the event into a national headline. Once again, radar operators reported unknown targets. Once again, people reported lights. And once again, fighter jets were launched. At this point, the situation was no longer local. News organizations began reporting on it. Public interest exploded because the idea of unknown objects over the Capitol was more than a curiosity. It felt like a security failure. And in the Cold War climate of the early 1950s, security fears were constant. This was the era of nuclear tension, the era of espionage, the era of public drills and military readiness. So when radar shows unknown targets near sensitive locations, the public imagination goes to the darkest place. Enemy aircraft, secret weapons, an intrusion. Now, any honest investigation of the Washington 1952 case has to acknowledge one crucial point. Radar is not a camera. Radar interprets reflections, and those reflections can be influenced by the atmosphere. Under certain conditions, radar can produce false targets. Not because it is broken, but because the air itself can create layers that bend signals. One major explanation offered for the Washington sightings involves something called temperature inversion. A temperature inversion occurs when a layer of warm air sits above cooler air, creating conditions that can bend radar signals and cause unusual returns. These returns can look like solid targets. They can move, they can change, and they can create confusion even for experienced operators. This explanation was famously discussed during official briefings after the event, and it remains one of the strongest conventional explanations for at least some of the radar contacts. But here's where the Washington case becomes difficult. The explanation might account for radar, but it does not automatically account for everything else. It does not automatically explain the timing of multiple systems detecting targets in the same place. It does not automatically explain the visual reports of lights. And it does not automatically explain why interceptors were involved without a clean resolution. So again, we face the same pattern we've seen in other cases. Conventional explanations can cover pieces, but the full picture remains debated. Now, let's consider the visual side. People reported lights in the sky. That could be many things. Aircraft seen at distance, stars near the horizon, bright planets, reflections, even meteors. In a high-attention atmosphere, when the public expects something, normal lights can be interpreted as extraordinary. So visual reports alone cannot close the case. But when visual reports occur alongside radar alerts, the story gains weight in the public mind because it feels coordinated. It feels like confirmation. Now, a key detail of the Washington 1952 story is the official response. The U.S. Air Force faced public pressure, not only to investigate, but to reassure. The result was one of the most famous press events in UFO history. A large press conference where officials discussed the sightings and offered explanations. The emphasis was on radar conditions, on atmospheric effects, on why unusual radar returns can occur. This was not an admission of extraterrestrials. It was an attempt to reduce fear. But in doing so, it created a lasting controversy. Because some people saw the press conference as a reasonable technical explanation, and others saw it as a dismissal. They believed it was an attempt to explain away something that could not be explained. That tension is part of why the case remains alive. Because the Washington sightings became more than a case file. They became a symbol of public distrust and of the gap between official statements and public imagination. Now, to treat this case fairly, we need to hold two truths at once. First, it is very likely that atmospheric conditions played a role. The idea of radar anomalies during temperature inversions is not fantasy. It is a known phenomenon. Second, it is also true that the event produced enough concern to trigger intercepts and public briefings. That does not mean the objects were extraordinary. It means the situation was confusing enough to be treated as serious. So the Washington case may not be a clean story of objects over the Capitol. It may be a story of a system under stress, a system reacting to ambiguous data in a high-security environment. That is still a fascinating story because it reveals how quickly uncertainty becomes a national event. Now, some researchers argue that even if radar was affected by inversion, not all targets can be explained that way. They point to correlations between different radar stations. They point to the reappearance of targets. They point to timing and behavior. Skeptics respond that multiple systems can still be affected by the same atmospheric conditions, especially if they are operating in the same region. Both arguments are plausible, and because the original data is not fully available in modern detail, the debate remains. What we can say responsibly is this. In July 1952, radar operators around Washington detected unknown targets on at least 2 major nights. The situation was taken seriously enough that fighters were scrambled. The event became a national headline. The U.S. Air Force held a major press conference and pointed to atmospheric conditions as a key explanation. But the combination of radar reports, visual claims, and an unclear intercept outcome left the public with no satisfying closure. And that is why the Washington 1952 case remains one of the most famous. Not because it proves a single extraordinary conclusion, but because it shows how a modern capital city can experience a wave of uncertainty in its skies, and how that uncertainty can become history. Now, here is the final thought to leave with. When a radar screen shows unknown targets, there are two possibilities. Either there are objects, or there are conditions that create the appearance of objects. Both possibilities matter, because in a high-security environment, both can trigger the same response. Jets launch, alerts spread, fear grows. And in 1952, that response played out above the capital of the United States. Whether the targets were real objects or atmospheric illusions, the event exposed something uncomfortable. The sky does not always give clear answers, and the systems designed to protect us can still be forced into uncertainty. That is the real legacy of Washington 1952, not a proof of aliens, but a demonstration of how quickly an unknown, real or perceived, can become a national story. And once a national story is written into history, the question never fully disappears. What was moving above Washington that summer? And if the official answer was correct, why did it feel to so many people like the case never truly closed?